Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pacharane Nirvase Sasunyavadi Paskyata Deshatarane Vanshakopatarubyascha Kripa Sindhu Bhyevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna. So thank you all for coming. This is part 2 of our Prabhupada Remembrances evening. How many were here last night? Last night we mentioned that from 1972 or so, the BBT, the Bhaktivedanta Book Trust, assigned photographers to be with Prabhupada while he traveled. So they had a very rich variety of pictures to use in publications like Back to Godhead magazine and Prabhupada's books and other BBT publications. So I was trained in photography, and I was one of the 3 official BBT photographers. I traveled with Prabhupada in the US and Canada and Europe and also India. So we went through about 100 pictures yesterday. Can everyone hear me okay? Is the music too loud or it's okay? And so we're going to go through another set of pictures today. This one is the one we finished on when Prabhupada arrived in the Manhattan Temple on 55th Street. He took a tour of the building, and here he's touring the restaurant facilities. He also used to very much enjoy watching plays that the devotees put on. There were some very expert actors and actresses amongst Prabhupada's disciples. On one occasion they put on a play, Krishna Kidnaps Rukmini, and Prabhupada was so absorbed in this play because it was so expertly acted. And at one point at the end he said, "Watching these plays is better than reading my books." Yeah, we were all, especially the person who played Rukmini. Her name was Rasagya. She's passed away since then. But she was trained as a professional actress. And she was so absorbed in this pastime of being Rukmini. At first, before the curtains opened, she was thinking, how can I play the goddess of fortune? This is absurd. But she was trained as an actress, and part of her training is the show must go on. And so she meditated on Rukmini Devi, and her every movement, her every look was believably Rukmini. We were all just captivated by it, and Prabhupada mentioned at the end that she was the best in the performance. Prabhupada also took us to holy places in India. We had a huge pandal in Delhi, and after that, Prabhupada took the group of us, about 30 of us, to Vrindavan. He went in a car, and we went in a bus, but his car broke down on the way, so he sat at the head of the bus. You can see him there, like the captain of our ship. And we visited Vristana, which is the appearance place of Srimati Radharani. It's on a very steep hill. And these palanquin carriers offered to carry Prabhupada up. And at first, Prabhupada's disciples, some of whom were very young and strong, said, no, we cannot let ordinary palanquin bearers carry Prabhupada. We will carry him. So 2 of them did that, and they were not used to carrying a palanquin in this way, and Prabhupada was rocking back and forth. And so he said, let the professional palanquin. So here the professional palanquin carriers are carrying him, and the devotees are walking behind. And of course we went to Vrindavan. This is Prabhupada in his rooms in Vrindavan, the original rooms at the Radha Damodar temple. This is the room where he translated the first canto of Srimad Bhagavatam before he went to America. And here he's talking to the proprietor of the temple. His name is Gaurachand Goswami. And although he's called a Goswami, he comes in a line of Goswamis, but he himself was a Grihasta. And he did not fully appreciate Prabhupada and Prabhupada's mission. And if you go to Vrindavan today and go to the Radha Damodar temple, you can see that Gaurachand Goswami's descendants similarly don't fully appreciate the culture of Krishna consciousness that Prabhupada was reestablishing in India. They had a long discussion at this particular time. It was in Hindi, so we couldn't follow it, but it was clear that Prabhupada was not fully pleased by the exchange. And Prabhupada has two rooms in this temple. One is the room where he slept and translated, and this is his small kitchen there. In 1972, as I mentioned yesterday, we went to Vrindavan for Kartik, for the month of Kartik. And for that month, Jamuna Devi Dasi, one of Prabhupada's amazing disciples, cooked for Prabhupada. And at lunch one day, she asked Prabhupada if he would allow me to take a photograph of him while he was honoring Prasadam. And he said yes, very kindly, and so this picture is a result. Outside the windows there is the Samadhi and Bhajan Kutir of Rupa Goswami, which was a source of great inspiration for Prabhupada when he lived in these rooms before coming to the United States. And he would take walks every morning. This, of course, is by the famous Madan Mohan temple of Sanatan Goswami. It was rather chilly at the time. We would bundle up. If you've heard the name Hayagriva Das, he's on the left there in white. He was there in 1972. He wrote a very wonderful book, Vrindavan Days, about this month in Vrindavan with Srila Prabhupada. And Prabhupada would speak in the courtyard of the Radha Damodar temple to the group of us. It was very basic philosophy, but highly impactful because it was so relevant and necessary for us to hear. It was quite extraordinary that after this Delhi Pandal, which was attended by the mayor of Delhi and the high ambassadors of Canada, they would introduce Prabhupada in the evenings. And 10,000, 15,000 people would attend this Pandal. So when that was finished, Prabhupada took this small group to this very rustic place, holy place of Vrindavan, and sat so simply under the trees and spoke Krishna Katha. He really wanted us to be immersed in the philosophy and to relish the holy places so that we would not drift away, but we would stay fixed throughout our lives. The devotees did Harinam through the streets of Vrindavan during the day. In the center there is a devotee playing the mridanga called Dinanath. He was a very wonderful kirtan leader. Also, Shamsundar is on the right. And in the evening we would gather again for to hear Nectar of Devotion from Srila Prabhupada. And he started from the very beginning, the preface and the introduction to Nectar Devotion. Pradumya, who's in the glasses there on the right, he would read a paragraph or even just a few sentences, and then Srila Prabhupada would comment. And then he would read a little more, and Prabhupada would comment again. And of course, Prabhupada knew all the streets and valleys and back lanes of Vrindavan intimately. Sometimes he would take us places by walking. Again, Shamsundar's on the right, and on the left is Gargamuni Swami. Prabhupada also bathed in the Yamuna. At first, this was the place he told the story of Brahma Mohana Leela, when Brahma was bewildered by Krishna's great energies. And then the devotees went to bathe, and Prabhupada sat down on the steps. And at first he said, "It is too cold. I am an old man. I will simply watch." And then he changed his mind. And he, as you can see here, he went in for a brief dip. So this was 1972. At that time, ISKCON had no property in Vrindavan. It was shortly after this that we got the property in Ramanreti that we have today. And then Prabhupada was very intent on building a temple there. And so finally, the temple opened a few years later, Ram Navami, and Prabhupada performed the first arti to Sri Sri Krishna Balaram. So at this time of the opening of the temple, for those who have been to Vrindavan, you know the temple room is not very large. And the temple room was entirely packed up, shoulder to shoulder, with devotees who had come from throughout the world and guests who had also been invited. And I was very intent on taking photographs of Prabhupada offering this first arti. So somehow I wended my way through this very tightly packed crowd and came to the front. And at that time there was one person standing between me and a clear view of Srila Prabhupada offering the arti, and that was Tripurari. He had just recently taken sannyas. And Prabhupada had called Tripurari the incarnation of book distribution. Tripurari Swami, at that point, spent his entire life as a devotee distributing Prabhupada's books in the airport with tremendous success. And he trained others to do it also. And for him, it was a real service to Srila Prabhupada. That's what he saw it as, a meditation on pleasing Prabhupada. And much of the funds that he collected by book distribution were sent to India to build this temple and the temple in Mayapur. And so for him, watching Srila Prabhupada, he felt personally involved because he had dedicated himself to helping Prabhupada in this way. And he was watching Prabhupada with rapt attention, riveted on Prabhupada's every move. And so when I tapped him on the shoulder to try to ask him to move so I could photograph, it was like I didn't exist. It was like nothing had happened. And I did that several times with no effect. Then I held my camera over his shoulder, pointing at him to try to indicate that I wanted to take pictures. Again, totally ignored, like it hadn't happened. So I was getting increasingly desperate because I felt these pictures were very historic and important. So I leaned over and put my mouth next to his ear because the kirtan was deafening. And I said very loudly, if you stand there, you can see Srila Prabhupada offering the arti. If you let me stand there, the whole world will see Srila Prabhupada offering this arti. So Tripurari, in his heart of hearts, he's a preacher. And when I said that, it touched something inside his heart. So he didn't move right away. I didn't know what I was going to do next. He didn't move right away, but after 2 or 3 seconds, he just slid aside so I could stand in the front there and get a series of pictures of Prabhupada offering the first arti. Then after a morning walk, we did this group photograph in front of the temple. You can see Prabhupada in the sunshine there, right in the center, surrounded by his disciples. This was an enormous victory for Prabhupada to be able to complete the temple and open it so successfully. And yet he himself remains very simple. This is a photograph my husband took in his rooms in Vrindavan, his original rooms. That's his original danda, there on the right, hanging up against the wall. And Prabhupada took great pains to train his devotees. This is one of his disciples, Gauri Devi Dasi, and Prabhupada is personally instructing her in dressing the deities. This is Sri Sri Radha Govinda in the Calcutta temple. Radha Govinda are also the deities that Prabhupada saw the worship of as a child. He lived across the street from the Radha Govinda temple in Calcutta, and his mother would take him in a perambulator to the temple, and he would see the arti and offer his obeisances. And so when it came time to name the deities in Calcutta, he named them Sri Sri Radha Govinda. The temple in Calcutta today is still in the same place, 3 Albert Road, as it was then at this picture. This is an initiation at 3 Albert Road in Calcutta. The person with his back to the camera and his arm in the air, that is my husband, Yadubara Das, receiving initiation, first initiation from Srila Prabhupada. The performer of the ceremony is Bhavananda, as you can see there. And Jananivas, who is the Pujari par excellence in Mayapur, he was also initiated at this same ceremony. And then in the back, you can see a model there. There's a devotee standing directly behind the model. Can everyone see that model? That was made under Prabhupada's instruction. It was the first design for the temple of the Vedic planetarium. This is also in the Calcutta temple. It's an appearance day of one of the acharyas. And you have Dinanath offering the arti. Tamal Krishna Maharaj is there on the right. And Chutananda Swami. And sitting playing the harmonium is Jamuna Devi Dasi. She's the person that sings the Govindam prayers every morning when we greet the deities. So this I was mentioning yesterday. Prabhupada was in his room in Calcutta, and one of the resident swamis there, one of his disciples, was describing to him all the problems in the Calcutta temple. And there were many at this time. The devotees were getting cheated regularly, so that the bhoga that they got was not of very good quality. The person who said he was a Brahmin cook, the devotees couldn't figure out how to cook very well in the kitchen. To use the utensils, even to use the burner, was challenging for them. So they hired someone who said he was a Brahmin cook, and he was neither a Brahmin nor a cook, unfortunately. So the devotees, as a result of this inferior prasadam, the devotees were getting ill, and they were arguing with each other. Nothing was exempt from being argued about. And the temple was never very convincingly clean. And so this devotee, this sannyasi, was relating all these problems to Prabhupada, and this is one of a series of pictures that I took at that time. And when I showed Prabhupada the pictures afterwards, he mentioned she has captured the mood. So what I understood, I suppose that could be understood in many ways, but Prabhupada was aware of these problems, but he was also very transcendental to them. And he also wanted us to be able to transcend the problems rather than wallow in those problems, because these things will come and go. And if we can keep our transcendental intent in mind and our transcendental process, then we can overcome these problems. Also in Prabhupada's rooms in Calcutta, whether he was in front of 10,000 people or 15 or 20,000 people or alone, he was absorbed in Krishna. It was not that he was a different person behind closed doors. And as mentioned, Prabhupada would receive many letters daily from all over the world, and he would respond to each letter in a personal way, giving instructions, guidance, inspiration. That was an important part of his daily activity, to answer these letters that came from around the world. Even, I might mention, my godsister, before the opening of the Krishna Balaram temple, she was living in California, and she visited her mother on her way to Vrindavan to attend the opening of the Krishna Balaram temple. And when her mother heard that she was going to Vrindavan and would be seeing Prabhupada, her mother said, what can I give Prabhupada that he might like? And so my god sister, her name is Urvasi, she said, well, Prabhupada likes guava jam. And so her mother had a guava tree, and she picked some guavas and made guava jam. And so Urvasi took this guava jam to Vrindavan and gave it to one of Prabhupada's servants to give to Prabhupada. And then she was attending the festival. It went on for some days. She didn't think about it. And all of a sudden, this servant came up to her and said, I've been looking all over for you. Prabhupada wants to write a letter to your mother thanking her for the guava jam. Now, this is when the temple is opening. There are literally hundreds of guests, special guests, thousands of devotees, all sorts of details to attend to. And Prabhupada sent his servant to find this devotee to get the address so he can reply and express gratitude for this jar of guava jam that he received from her mother. So it is quite something extraordinary how conscientious Prabhupada was to try to encourage each and every person that came forward to do something for Krishna. This is in Delhi. After Vrindavan, the Kartik in Vrindavan, we all went to Delhi. And it was quite cold at that time. It was in December. And at that time, there was a war going on between India and Pakistan, 1971. And there was a blackout in Delhi, so that at night, when the Pakistani bombers came over, they couldn't see the lights of the city. So we had to function by candlelight at night, and even that was not supposed to be there. And during the morning walks, Prabhupada would pause at a newspaper stand to see the progress of the war. Here he's reading the headlines from the newspaper to see what is happening with the war. And on the right there is Shamasundar also looking at the newspaper headlines. And in the back is Madri. Madri was the wife of Tamal Krishna, who became Tamal Krishna Goswami. This is in Dallas. Prabhupada would occasionally walk around the community and visit the homes of the devotees, see how they were living. That's my husband, Yadubara Prabhu, in the background there. This is on a morning walk in Berkeley, California, on the campus of the University of Berkeley. And the devotees told Prabhupada that the students were under so much pressure going to school, so much pressure to succeed, that sometimes they became overwhelmed and they would climb to the top of that tower and jump to commit suicide. And Prabhupada's comment was how unfortunate that is, that they don't understand actually who they are, the students. They're going to get a higher education, but they're not taught who they are and how they can progress spiritually. It's all centered around material capabilities. Many profound discussions in that way on the morning walks. This is in Mayapur. Sometimes there was a light rain, and the devotees would protect Prabhupada from the rain. That's Satsvarup Maharaj holding the umbrella. And there are also light times during the walks. As I mentioned yesterday, Prabhupada had a marvelous sense of humor, and he could turn a phrase, and with the timing and the expression, everyone would be surprised and burst out laughing. The morning walks were a wonderful time, both to be with Prabhupada and to hear his reflections. This morning we were mentioning, after a class in Los Angeles, the next morning Prabhupada was relating the same verse and expressing how this one line, this one Sanskrit line, contains all the information about our situation in this material world. Bhaveshmin klishyamananam, how we're suffering in this material world because of ignorance, avidya. And because of this ignorance, we are full of material desires, and as a result of these material desires, we perform fruitive activities, and from the fruitive activities we must endure repeated birth and death and rebirth and death. And that is our situation in this material world, expressed in one line of one verse of Srimad Bhagavatam. This was on Venice Beach. At this time there was tremendous competition amongst the book distributors. Prabhupada was encouraging the book distributors more and more. Especially the Western devotees, it's important for them to be very active, to be very engaged. If they just sit, they can get into trouble with their restless mind. So Prabhupada engaged us very much in book distribution, which took a lot of energy and resourcefulness. And then a competition arose. Everyone was trying to be the best group to distribute books. Los Angeles was very active in that way and sometimes excelled. Then they had the Radha Damodar bus party that traveled all over America in buses, and they were spurred on by Tamal Krishna Maharaj, who was highly courageous and very often won these competitions. So on this occasion, one devotee is telling Prabhupada, or told Prabhupada, that they are actually doing better in book distribution, their temple, than the Radha Damodar bus party. And Prabhupada replied, "Don't tell Tamal Krishna Goswami, the leader of the Radha Damodar bus party, or he will have a heart attack." And all the devotees laughed. It was such a surprising statement from Prabhupada. On the left there is Hridayananda Das Goswami with a red sweater. Prabhupada is telling a story on a morning walk in New York. This was in Toronto. There was a devotee in Toronto who asked very profound questions. He's on the right there with his hand in the bead bag. He had been reading Prabhupada's books and very thoughtful. And he asked questions that were very deep about faith and how we can acquire faith and keep faith. Prabhupada gave answers that were truly remarkable at that time. And this on the right is Srila Damodar. He became Srila Damodar Goswami. He was a PhD scientist and one of Prabhupada's first PhD disciples. And Prabhupada engaged him very much in creating the Bhaktivedanta Institute. Prabhupada saw that the scientists in this age are influencing people greatly. In the past, people were more religious, but now the scientists have turned people to think that everything can be explained in terms of material energy. And so he wanted his scientist disciples, his PhD disciples, to challenge the scientists. If they say you can create life from matter, give them all the matter they want and let them create life. And invariably they say, yes, in the future we will do. And Prabhupada said, we don't want a post-dated check. We want you to do it now. You say life comes from matter. Here is the matter. Give us life. because his understanding is that life comes from life. It does not come from matter. Life comes from Krishna. And however much matter you have and whatever you do with it, you cannot create life. The soul must be present for life to exist. Unfortunately, the devotees recorded many of these morning walks. They're in the conversation books, and if you have the Veda base, also they're in the Veda base, so we can take advantage of them even today. This was in Visakha. That's Malati on the right, Malati Devi Dasi. The Prabhupada's godbrother, I think I mentioned yesterday, B.V. Puri Maharaj, had a Gaudiya Math in Visakha, which is right on the ocean, halfway between Calcutta and Madras. And Prabhupada spent a week there with his disciples, a small group of disciples. Every day he would walk along the beach. And it was really wonderful to see him with his godbrothers. We had never seen that before. And they really were like brothers. They had wonderful exchanges. And they fed us up to the necks with wonderful prasadam too. We visited Tirupati, which is a holy place in India. And Prabhupada, when he had this flower, he said, "This flower is the color of Lord Chaitanya." So, color on film can be very inaccurate. I mean, what I'm seeing on my screen here is different color from from what's up there. But we get some idea of the color of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu from this Kadamba flower. This behind Prabhupada is Madhura. Madhura was the wife of Tejas. Tejas was the temple president in Delhi. And Madhura married very young. And Tejas was a difficult personality for everyone, including his wife. And so they would argue quite a bit. And sometimes Tejas would complain to Prabhupada, "My wife is not listening to me." And Prabhupada at one point said, "She is a very intelligent person, maybe you should listen to her." So Madhura was with us in Visakha. She's on the left there. And Malati is in the middle. Malati and Shamsundar had a small daughter who came to India with us. Her name was Saraswati, and she and Prabhupada had a wonderful relationship. This is Saraswati garlanding Prabhupada, which Prabhupada relished. Sometimes in the Calcutta temple, Saraswati had a small altar on the veranda, and she would offer a little dupe arti to her deity, and then she would go into Prabhupada's room with the dupe, with the little flame, so that Prabhupada could honor it by touching it to his head. And whatever he was doing, he would stop and do just that. He would honor the flame, touch it to his head. And at one point, he was teasing her. He told Saraswati he was going to put postage stamps on her head and send her to the Gurukul. And they had a very sweet relationship. Prabhupada also said that Saraswati was a preacher. She would go up to people, adults, and she would say, "Do you know Krishna?" And the adult, just to play with her, would say, "No." And Saraswati would say, "Oh, the Supreme Personality of Godhead." And Prabhupada said, "This is preaching. According to her capacity, she is preaching." And he would also garland her. After this, she would turn around and go to her mother, thrilled to get a garland from Srila Prabhupada. This is on the On the lawn at Bhaktivedanta Manor, Prabhupada would have exchanges with the children in this way. Then one year, when the temple in Mayapur was first constructed, Prabhupada's godbrother Sridhar Swami came to visit Prabhupada. And Prabhupada had a special Vyasasan for two. A Vyasasan built for two, made so they could sit together on the Vyasasan. Prabhupada had great respect for Sridhar Swami, his knowledge, and his ability to express Krishna consciousness in English also. There are many books by Sridhar Swami which are very enlightening on the topics of different aspects of Krishna consciousness. Now, this young boy was resisting shaving up for a long time, so when he finally shaved up, Prabhupada teased him by pulling his sika a little bit. This is at the Berkeley Temple in California, Berkeley, California. It's rather a magnificent Vyasasan. And again, after the morning walk, the devotees arranged that everyone would be outside the temple for this group portrait. And for that purpose, they took the Vyasasan from the temple room outside, and they all stood around it for this group portrait. So this would be about 7 a.m. in the morning. The sun has not yet quite risen. And in Chicago, also another similar situation where all the devotees gather outside the temple after the morning walk. You see Prabhupada shining in the center there, surrounded by his followers. And this is the famous Radha Damodar traveling bus party. This time they had 4 Greyhound buses, and they were all fitted out with altars inside and a kitchen and places for the devotees to sleep. And they traveled throughout the United States, distributing books and making devotees. And that the deities there are Sri Sri Radha Damodar. They're today worshipped in Gitanagari Farm in Pennsylvania. But it was quite an army, and although they did tremendous service, they also created a bit of disruption in the temples. Sometimes they would say to the brahmacharis in the temples, "You should travel and preach. Why are you staying in one place?" And the brahmacharis who were doing necessary service would start traveling, and the temples would be disrupted in that way. So it created a stir. Prabhupada had to sort it out. And wherever he went, he would initiate. At that time when he went to Chicago, there was an installation of Gaur-Nitai deities to go in the different Radha Damodar buses, and there were initiation for 72 devotees at that time in Chicago. And on the morning walk one morning, I asked Prabhupada to pose. So he borrowed a danda from one of his disciples. The danda is supposed to be the same height as the person's head, the sannyasi's head, but Prabhupada was relatively short, and some of his sannyasi disciples were tall, so his danda is way higher than it's supposed to be, strictly speaking. This is the type of thing some of his godbrothers would criticize him for. The sannyasi is supposed to carry a danda for 10 years, and after 10 years, he's no longer required to carry it. So Prabhupada's original danda is in his rooms at Radha Damodar. It was in the earlier picture. But if someone wants to criticize, they can find something to criticize. This is in Dallas, Texas. This is where the Gurukul was for some years. And Prabhupada visited several times to encourage the devotees there and to train the teachers also. He told the teachers that they should not use force, but they should teach with love, which is a much more powerful force than force. And in the mornings, the children would personally offer to him their flowers for Guru Puja. And Prabhupada had wonderful exchanges with them, with the children, the students there. When he first arrived, he had every student come to his room and he gave them 2 rasgullas in their hand. Each and every student. And there were many, many students. He sat there for a long time distributing rasgullas. Now this little boy, that's his mother. Her name is Bimala. And he took this rasgulla from Prabhupada and then he dropped it. So his mother picked it up and gave it back to him. And many years later, he was speaking about this when he was in his 20s. And he said, this is actually the story of my life, that I've been given Krishna consciousness and I regularly drop it, and my mother picks it up and gives it back to me very patiently. And Prabhupada in the airport, waiting for departure onto his next destination. This was also a time when the devotees could have personal exchanges with him and experience his presence close up. And wherever Prabhupada went, he requested that at the end of his lecture, he be given a plate of what they called Prabhupada cookies, and he would give a cookie to the children, so that he would also have a personal exchange with the children. Very often, they were too restless or noisy to be present during the class. But Prabhupada would have this way of interacting with them. And he did this wherever he was. It became a standard activity. And the mothers and the children would look forward to it with delight. At one point, Brahmananda, who was Prabhupada's secretary at that time, he was thinking, well, Prabhupada got up at 2 a.m., he translated for hours, then he went on a long, brisk morning walk, then he greeted the deities, he was there, of course, for Guru Puja, he gave an hour-long discourse, he must be tired. So rather than him distributing the cookies, I'll distribute them for Prabhupada so Prabhupada can go and rest. So he said to Prabhupada that idea, and Prabhupada looked at him. He said, no, I want to distribute the cookies. So Brahmananda never got to do that for Prabhupada. This is sandalwood paste. The devotees would regularly put sandalwood paste on Prabhupada. And Prabhupada once mentioned this is the ornament of a devotee. Very often, even though his days were so packed, Prabhupada would find time to play the instruments and sing the beautiful bhajans by Narottam Das Thakur and other great Vaishnavas, Bhaktivinoda Thakur. And some of them, by Krishna's grace, were recorded. This is at the Golden Avatar Studio in Los Angeles. You can hear those recordings today. And as I mentioned, Prabhupada would rise very early each morning to translate. This is in the Brooklyn Temple. It was a time of great concentration for him. Going into this to film and photograph, we felt very much like we were invading this very sacred place at a very sacred time. And Prabhupada was in deep meditation and concentration on this service. In San Diego, they had a public festival in San Diego. It's one of the times Prabhupada was looking directly at the camera. And behind him is a huge portrait of the Panchatattva. And here we are in Detroit, again after the morning walk. The devotees have arranged for the Vyasa-san to be outside. This is the same picture that you have on the altar here with Shri Radha Gopinath, Prabhupada in Detroit, surrounded by his enthusiastic disciples. And it was in Detroit that Prabhupada spoke to Ambarish. That's Ambarish on the right, just in front of the bookshelf, with his head down a little bit, the head of dark hair. And Prabhupada mentioned the temple in Mayapur that he wanted to build to explain the cosmology according to the directions given in the Bhagavatam. And he asked Ambarish, what do you think of this idea? And Ambarish said, yes, it sounds like a wonderful idea. And Prabhupada said, then you can help. Ambarish is the grandson of Henry Ford. He's a millionaire, disciple of Srila Prabhupada. And he has made it his life's mission to see this temple completed in Mayapur. And this was the instruction directly from Prabhupada at this occasion in Detroit. And then on the left, also in front of the bookshelf, is Lekha Shravanti. She was the daughter of Walter Reuther, for those who know the history in America. Walter Reuther founded the unions in America, and the unions were very strong at that time, and they would be fighting regularly with the owners of the companies, like the Fords. And so the Reuthers, as the union head, would be fighting the Fords as the owners of the Ford Foundation. So these two were in constant conflict, but here their descendants, Lekha Shravanti and Ambarish, were working together. Together they bought this beautiful temple in Detroit, and Ambarish went on, of course, to help in so many other ways too. Now this is in Manhattan. You'll see we had a building there, 11-story building on 55th Street. And there was a balcony on that building, so all the devotees went onto the balcony, and many hung out of the windows for this portrait. So you can see that tiny little dot on the balcony there, red dot. That's Prabhupada's Vyasa-san. That was in the previous picture. It's in Washington, D.C. Prabhupada met here with his disciples who were scholars. I mentioned before Swarup Damodar, so other scholars also joined, Sariputta and Madhava, and they together formed this Bhaktivedanta Institute specifically to give the principles of Krishna consciousness to the intellectuals, the scholarly class. And again, Prabhupada posing with a danda that's too tall for him. He never had a danda that was the right size. Here he was distributing sweets in Delhi, and there was some very nice joke that Prabhupada relished at that time. And he also visited another Gaudiya Math. This one was in Vrindavan. He was given this small book. Prabhupada was very keen when he was given a spiritual book to see how the philosophy was presented, and very often it was presented in a way that was not true to the Shastra. And when that happened, he would just leave the book aside. Sometimes if the author was there, he would challenge the author also. But on this occasion, he appreciated this small book. The devotees also were invited to this temple. It's the Emily-Tala temple in Vrindavan for prasadam. And somehow the women didn't have a ride to go. So all the men arrived, ready for prasadam, and Prabhupada looked around, where are the ladies? And then he realized there was no ride for them, so he sent his own car back, and the ladies all piled into his car and then came a little bit later and honored Prasadam there. And again, Prabhupada was very relaxed and happy in that environment. This is an unusual occasion that we were in Dallas filming and photographing, and we wanted to make a film about the Hare Krishna movement. And we thought in this film we would include Srila Prabhupada's own childhood and how he grew up in the Vaishnava culture. And one aspect of that was that he celebrated, as a young boy, he would celebrate Rath Yatra. So we wanted to recreate that celebration of Prabhupada as a child observing Rath Yatra. And we asked Prabhupada, well, what did your Rath Yatra cart look like? So he got out pencil and paper, and he drew, which is what he's doing here. He's drawing the Rath Yatra cart that he used as a child, and this is his drawing. He had a horse. That's a horse and a horse rider. And the deities are there it's like a side angle. The deities are behind the horse driver. So that was very special. That picture is now at the Bhaktivedanta archives, carefully preserved for all time. So that is some photographs of His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. Perhaps there's some comments or reflections from you? We have a few minutes left. Yes, please. In the building in Manhattan?
Yeah, and a lot of devotees through the window they are trying to show Prabhupada or see Prabhupada from up, down, everywhere, like through the windows and everything. How would you plan to go and take that shot?
Yeah, we had to plan that well in advance. We'd give a time that the picture is going to be and explain where the photographer would be, and then hope that everyone cooperated. But everyone was very excited to be part of it. So it worked out. There was a lot of enthusiasm to participate and to be in the building with Prabhupada at that time. So, yeah, but usually there was a temple commander who would instruct the devotees where to go and what to do, and that helped enormously.
Maybe more of a question. How was it like to be with you?
Well, that's hard to answer because there are so many facets, both to him and to whoever is with him. So it was very, I could say, different from day to day. In general, though, you really felt that you wanted to become more Krishna conscious, to be qualified to be with him, and very appreciative of his vision and of his ability to inspire others, quite extraordinary, and also how he was constantly exerting himself to fulfill the desire of his spiritual master was a great source of inspiration. So yeah, I tried to write a book just to answer that question. It turned out to 300 pages to answer that question. I think yesterday I showed one that I was in. Maybe not today though. There was one my husband took that was on the screen yesterday that I was in. But these pictures mostly I took. I was asked to give a present. Usually, I explained yesterday, usually I didn't think who took what picture. I just showed pictures, but then I was asked to give a slide presentation of pictures I had took, so I took about 90 or 95% of these pictures, so I was not in them. Yeah.
Srila Prabhupada's writings, we see that he's stressing a lot on book distribution, he's stressing a lot on chanting. Says that 99% of devotion service is chanting. So your service is bringing so much joy and so much appreciation to all devotees of Prabhupada. But when you were doing that service, do you have any doubts or you're not able to reconcile? How could you reconcile that what you're doing right now will be appreciated by devotees and is actually right? Because Prabhupada very frequently, very strongly talks about book distribution and chanting as a service. But you're doing something which is really nice and it's helping everyone. But at that time, when people are not supporting, how can you reconcile that? I'm doing something which is very valuable.
Yeah, that's a good question, and it was actually a problem at some time because book distribution was so emphasized. And as I mentioned, Prabhupada himself had to engage these young Westerners who were full of energy and full of passion, and so book distribution was ideal for that people could go out and use their energy and their passion to serve Prabhupada in this way and give people something very valuable, unbelievably valuable by giving them a book. And so that was tremendously emphasized. And devotees were, as I mentioned, competing with each other to try to please Prabhupada by distributing the most books. And sometimes it was a source of confusion. Should we be filming? Should we be photographing? Maybe we should be distributing books. But that confusion came only from Prabhupada's disciples, never ever from Prabhupada. Prabhupada was asked, he was in his room in Los Angeles, and he was asked, what is the best way to please you? So the book distributors were expecting he would say, by distributing books. And the teachers at the Gurukul were expecting he would say, by teaching Krishna's children. And the pujaris were expecting he would say, by making the deities extraordinarily beautiful. But what Prabhupada actually said was, if you become Krishna conscious. If you become Krishna conscious. And that is a very individual thing. He emphasized book distribution both because he wanted the books to go out, but also because he needed to engage these passionate Westerners who had so much energy, full of youthful enthusiasm. And so this was an ideal way to engage them. But around my husband and me, we were filming and photographing. He never, ever, ever mentioned book distribution. He encouraged us in what we were doing. So, yeah, it has to be understood, I think, in a broad context. And without doing that, we understand it in an immature way, and then we become confused. But the essence is, if you become Krishna conscious, whether it's by teaching, or by distributing books, or by serving the deities, or by serving the Vaishnavas, by cooking, by earning money for Krishna, the point is, become Krishna conscious. Thank you all very much for your attention. All glories to His divine grace. A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. Hare Krishna.